Every night I died, not in a different way, not in a different place. The dream was always exactly the same. A frozen battlefield stretched endlessly beneath a dark sky. Snow, once pure white, was stained crimson with blood. The metallic scent of battle lingered in the icy air, and somewhere in the distance, swords clashed against shields. My body felt unbearably cold, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move. A pair of trembling hands held me close, an alpha. His arms wrapped around me as though he believed he could stop death itself if he simply refused to let go. Warm tears landed on my face, disappearing into the snow before I could understand why he was crying from the pain. Somehow, even though I couldn't see his face, I knew he loved me. I promised I'd protect you. Every single night he said those same words. Every single night I reached toward him, and every single night I woke up before I could see who he was. My name is Caelan. I'm 23 years old, an Omega, and the owner of the smallest flower shop in our city. It isn't much. The paint on the front door has begun to peel, the shelves creak whenever I walk past them, and every winter I have to place blankets beneath the windows because the cold slips through the old wood. But I love it. Flowers have always felt honest to me. They bloom without asking for recognition. They brighten someone's day without expecting anything in return. Even when they wilt, they leave behind memories. Perhaps that's why I chose this life. Unlike people, flowers never lied. Every morning I unlocked the shop just before sunrise. The scent of roses, lilies, and lavender greeted me like old friends, and before the first customer arrived, I always made myself a cup of tea while arranging fresh bouquets in the display window. Most days were peaceful. Some customers bought flowers to celebrate new beginnings. Others bought them to apologize. And sometimes they bought them to say goodbye forever. Watching people walk through every chapter of their lives made me realize just how fragile happiness really was. Maybe that's why I smiled so often. Not because I was always happy, but because life was far too short to spend it looking miserable. The only shadow that followed me everywhere was the dream. It had haunted me since I was 13 years old. At first I thought it was nothing more than a nightmare. Then weeks became months, months became years. 10 years later, nothing had changed. The battlefield, the snow, the crying alpha, the promise. If fate gives me another chance, I'll find you again. Every morning I woke up with tears already on my cheeks. Every morning my heart ached for someone I had never met. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if somewhere in the world there truly was a man grieving a death that had never happened. Ridiculous. Impossible. Yet no explanation ever made more sense. When I was younger, I used to tell my grandmother about the dream. She never dismissed it. She never laughed or told me I was imagining things. Instead, she would quietly sit beside my bed and gently brush the hair away from my face while listening without interrupting. One evening, after I had finished describing the battlefield yet again, she looked at me with a sadness I didn't understand. Some dreams aren't dreams, Caelan, I frowned. What else could they be? They're echoes. Echoes of what? She glanced toward the old family photographs hanging on the wall before answering. Of lives the soul refuses to forget. I laughed. You mean reincarnation? She smiled. You don't have to believe in it. Because your soul already does. At 13, I rolled my eyes and forgot the conversation by the next morning. Now, her words returned to me far more often than I wanted to admit. The day everything changed began like every other. Rain fell steadily against the shop windows, covering the streets in silver reflections. Business was unusually quiet, giving me plenty of time to organize a new shipment of white lilies that had arrived earlier that morning. I had just finished trimming the stems when the little bell above the entrance chimed. Welcome, I called automatically without looking up. No one answered. A strange silence settled over the room. When I finally raised my head, time stopped. The man standing in the doorway looked as though he had stepped out of another world. He was tall enough that the doorframe seemed too small for him. Rain had darkened his black hair, a few strands falling carelessly across sharp silver eyes that seemed almost unreal. His dark coat fit perfectly over broad shoulders, and despite the storm outside, not a single movement of his suggested discomfort. He looked calm, powerful, completely out of place inside my tiny flower shop. For several seconds, neither of us moved. His gaze remained fixed on me, not curious, not surprised. It was something far deeper, something that made my chest tighten for reasons I couldn't explain. Then, the bouquet in his hand slipped from his fingers, flowers scattered across the wooden floor, his lips parted slightly. Caelan? Hearing my name from a complete stranger made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. I blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Have we met before?" His expression shattered. There was no better word for it. The calmness disappeared, replaced by a pain so raw it almost frightened me. For one brief moment, I genuinely thought he was about to cry. Then he closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and shook his head. "No." His voice sounded strained. "I mistook you for someone else." Someone else. The answer should have satisfied me. Instead, it only created more questions. Because people who mistake strangers don't look at them as though they've finally found the most important person in their entire world. He quietly chose a bouquet of white lilies, paid nearly twice their value, thanked me with a small nod, and walked back into the rain without another word. Long after the door closed, I was still staring at the empty entrance. For reasons I couldn't explain, the flower shop suddenly felt much colder than before. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I tried convincing myself that I was overthinking everything. Customers came and went. A young couple argued over whether pink roses or sunflowers were more romantic. An elderly man bought a single white carnation, just as he did every Friday, before quietly thanking me and leaving. A little girl spent nearly 10 minutes deciding which daisy looked the happiest. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet, my thoughts never left the stranger. Every time the shop door opened, I caught myself looking up, half expecting to see those silver eyes again. He never returned. Not that day. That night, the dream came back. Only, it wasn't quite the same. The battlefield was still there, buried beneath endless snow, but this time the silence felt different. I could hear the wind howling through broken banners. Horses cried out somewhere in the distance. The smell of smoke filled the frozen air. And then, I saw him. Not clearly, just a silhouette. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair blowing in the wind. He was running toward me. "No!" His voice echoed across the battlefield. For the first time, I heard it perfectly. The same voice. The stranger's voice. He dropped to his knees beside me, lifting my head into his lap. His armor was covered in blood, though I couldn't tell whether it belonged to him or everyone else around us. His hands trembled so violently he could barely hold me. "I promised," he whispered. "I promised I wouldn't lose you again." Again. Before I could ask what he meant, the dream shattered. I woke up gasping for air. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The room was dark except for the moonlight spilling through the curtains. I pressed a hand against my chest. Why did his voice sound so familiar? I had only met him once. That wasn't enough for someone to appear so vividly in my dreams. Unless... No. I forced myself to laugh. I was letting one strange customer get inside my head. That had to be all this was. Nothing more. The next morning, I opened the flower shop earlier than usual, mostly because I hadn't managed to fall asleep again. The city was just beginning to wake. Bakers carried fresh bread into nearby cafes. Shopkeepers swept rainwater away from their entrances. Somewhere across the street, a violinist had already begun playing a slow, beautiful melody. It should have been peaceful. Instead, I couldn't stop glancing toward the door, not because I expected him to return, because I hoped he would. The thought alone made me sigh. What is wrong with you, Caelan? I had exchanged perhaps 5 sentences with the man. 5. Yet somehow, I already wanted answers only he could give. The morning passed quietly until the familiar bell above the entrance chimed once again. I looked up. It was him. The stranger stepped inside, his dark coat still damp from the morning mist. This time, however, he didn't seem surprised to see me. Instead, he walked directly toward the counter. I'd like another bouquet, I smiled politely. For someone special? For a brief second, a faint smile appeared on his lips. Yes. Something inside me tightened. His answer shouldn't have bothered me. He was handsome, confident. Of course there was someone waiting for him. Trying to ignore the strange disappointment rising in my chest, I reached for fresh flowers. What kind? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched me work. The silence stretched long enough to become awkward. Finally, he spoke. What flowers would you choose? For someone you've been searching for your entire life. My hand stopped moving. I looked up. Our eyes met. The expression on his face wasn't hopeful. It wasn't romantic. It was exhausted, as though he had spent years carrying a weight no one else could see. I swallowed. I suppose, I answered softly, I'd choose something that survives every season. He looked at the lilies beside me. They still bloom after harsh winters. I smiled. They do. So, his voice dropped almost to a whisper. They know how to come back. For reasons I couldn't explain, a chill ran down my spine. Over the next week, he kept returning, always around the same time, always buying flowers, always choosing white lilies. Sometimes we spoke for only a minute, sometimes not at all. Yet each visit felt strangely familiar, almost comfortable. I found myself looking forward to hearing the little bell above the door. I learned his name, Rowan. He offered nothing more than that, no surname, no explanation. Whenever I asked what he did for a living, he simply smiled and changed the subject. Whenever I asked where he lived, he answered, close enough. It was mysterious, almost frustrating, and yet I couldn't stop thinking about him. One rainy evening, just as I was closing the shop, Rowan arrived once more. I thought you weren't coming today, I admitted before I could stop myself. His eyebrows lifted slightly. You noticed? I looked away, embarrassed. You've become a regular customer. I have. You really must like lilies. A shadow crossed his face. They remind me of someone. Something about the way he said it made my chest ache. I carefully wrapped the bouquet and held it out to him. When he reached to take it, our fingers touched, only for a heartbeat, but it was enough. The world disappeared. The flower shop vanished, the rain, the city, everything. I was standing somewhere else. Snow, so much snow, a battlefield, broken swords buried beneath the ice, smoke rising into a black sky. Then, a sharp pain exploded through my chest. I looked down. A blade was protruding from my body. Blood soaked my white robes. Someone screamed my name. Caelan? I turned. Rowan, not wearing a dark coat, wearing silver armor stained with blood. His face twisted in absolute terror as he ran toward me. He caught me just before I collapsed. His arms wrapped around me. His tears fell onto my face, exactly, like they had in every dream. He held me so tightly it almost hurt. I'm sorry. I'm too late. I promised I'd save you this time. This time? Before I could understand those words, everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on the floor of my flower shop. The bouquet had fallen beside me. Customers were gone. The only person still there was Rowan. He was kneeling beside me. His hands were shaking. His face was pale, as though he had just witnessed something he had feared for years. I stared at him, struggling to breathe. What? My voice barely came out. What just happened? Rowan closed his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then so quietly I almost didn't hear him, he whispered, "It happened again." My heartbeat stopped. Again? What did he mean? Again?